Hello, and welcome to this edition of The Logos, the life of light, love, and logic. This is episode 2. Last week, we started doing an introduction to the Logos, and we want to continue with that introduction today by talking about, does belief in the Logos matter? Just a reminder that the Logos is the spoken word or discourse that gives structure and order to things. So the purpose of this program is to shine light on the Logos, who gives structure, order, and meaning to our lives. This program believes that a lot of our existential questions, a lot of the questions we have about our existence, about our life, can be answered and can be discovered as we look into the Logos. So a quick review from last week. We talked about how the ancient Jewish Christian writers, Moses and John, both declared God to be the Logos, the one who created and put all things and gave structure and order to all things. The existence of the Logos is declared to be truth. So what is truth? Pontius Pilate asked that question many years ago. Truth is that which exists, that which is real. So when God says that he is the I am that I am, this is the equivalency of saying I exist, I am real, I am. So truth is real. It exists. And it's, despite any of our opinions, beliefs, or perspectives, truth is. So truth exists whether we believe it or not, whether we discover it or not, whether we understand it or not, whether we realize it or not. There are truths about many things. We talked about last week too how many times we act based upon our beliefs about a truth, more so than do we act on the truth, because sometimes we don't know the truth. Sometimes we assume the truth. Sometimes we are trying to find the truth. So we have assumptions about the truth, and those are our beliefs that we act upon. And then finally, we talked about last week how our beliefs are shaped by our influences and by our experiences. So for this particular episode, we have two objectives. We want to look further into how our beliefs impact how we are open to the truth. And secondly, why does belief in the Logos or God matter? So we start off kind of just as a refresher also from last week, we want to talk about how the intensity of what a person believes determines what he does. And that's very important to remember, because a lot of times we say, well, I believe this or I believe that, but it's actually the intensity of what you believe that determines what you say or do. So what we believe about anything impacts how we think, act, or reflect. And so I've listed here for you several things: what we think about life, how we act about God, authority, pleasure, pain, relationships, exercise, fast food restaurants. I mean, the list it's innumerable. We have beliefs about so many things, and it impacts how we live. Especially the stronger the belief, the stronger it impacts how we live. So let's take exercise, for example. I personally would like to lose a few pounds. I also realize that I need to probably exercise more. But how strong of a belief is that if I don't exercise, or if I don't watch my carbs, or I don't watch the kinds of foods that I eat? So I may say, I believe I need to do this, but that intensity of belief is not very strong if I'm not acting upon that. So we have belief, there's people say, I believe in God. We talked about that last week. About 95% of people in America claim some sort of belief in a supreme being. But yet, when you narrow that down, only about 5% of the people in America are active in sharing their faith. So if there's a God out there who says, love your neighbor as yourself and love one another as I've loved you, and yet you only have 5% of the people who are really sharing that faith, there's a lot of people who say they believe in God, but how many people actually act upon that? So that shows the intensity of that belief. Now, when we talk about our beliefs, there's primarily three areas where our beliefs come from. And there can be more, but these are just three that are basic areas. First of all, is from our soul. Now, this is from a Judeo-Christian perspective. If somebody has an atheistic perspective or a secular perspective, they're probably not going to acknowledge the existence of a soul. But from a Judeo-Christian perspective, our soul, who is the essence of who we are, it's a makeup of our intellect, our will, our emotions, our personality. A lot of times our beliefs come from who we are. The scriptures tell us that before we were born, God knit us together in our mother's womb. He was actually shaping us, not just physically, not just the color of our eye, the color of our hair, but he also was instilling in us things like our interest or our abilities, I mean, even from the time we're a little baby and born, God knew some of us might be strong, some of us might be athletic, some of us might like to read history books, some of us might like science. And so from within our soul, there's already this propensity or disposition to believe certain ways. I mean, that's why are some kids strong-willed and some kids compliant? Because they were born that way. There was something in their soul that makes them that way for a purpose. So our soul can impact how we believe things, how we view things. Secondly, our social influences and our environment impact what we believe. And I think whether you're a religious person, a spiritual person, or a non-spiritual person, I think everybody can agree on this, that our environment has a big role to shape what we believe about things. So if you look at your social influences, like your parents and your peers, big influence on why you believe what you believe. You know, why do people believe, what the music you like, the food that you like to eat, what you believe about life in general? A lot of that comes from how your parents raised you or the peer influence that you had in your life, as well as your environment. Now, when we talk about environment, we're talking, of course, about the physical environment that you live in, but we're also talking about the culture, the historical setting. Think about this. People 100 years ago or 200 years ago would definitely have a different belief about the world than we do today because they didn't have all the technological advances. Think about it. Having cell phones, having computers, having automobiles, having airplanes, that impacts how we view the world and our belief system about things because it's given us more opportunities to be exposed to things. So that definitely has an impact upon us. There's also social parameters. And what I mean by that is every culture sets boundaries and every culture sets rules. So think of all the hundreds of countries that there are in the world, and they're all unique. In fact, that's one of the things that makes the United States such a unique place is we talk about we have freedoms. We have freedom of the press, we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, we have the right to assemble, we have the right to bear arms, we have the right, that we're not forced to quarter soldiers or the military. I mean, we have these Bill of Rights that are given to us by our government basically to ensure our freedoms. Unfortunately, not all countries can enjoy that. There are countries in this world that if you get caught with a Bible, you're in trouble. There are countries in this world that if you go to a Christian church, you're going to get in trouble. There are countries in this world that if you speak out against the government, you're going to get in trouble. For us that live in America, that almost seems like a foreign concept. Of course, there are forces in America who want to impose those same restrictions on certain people, but at the same time, the social culture and the legal culture of a nation can impact our views. Because guess what? I mean, as I'm recording this video, we're going through a time in America where there are people who feel very boldly about things, and so they feel free to express themselves. Some of it's definitely gotten out of hand, but I tell you what, there are certain countries that if they were pushing over statues and burning down buildings and rioting and looting, their government wouldn't tolerate that at all. So the social and legal parameters can also affect what we believe and what we do in this life. And then the third thing I want to talk about is our personal experiences within the environment or society. So again, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, we're all born with a soul, which involves our mind, will, intellect, emotions, our personality traits, these dispositions to certain things, and those shape how we believe. Then as we have influences in our lives, environmental and social influences, that can have an impact upon what we believe. But then we also have our personal experiences. So you can take two children in the same household, and obviously they have two different souls. So they're going to have two different interests, two different inclinations, maybe two different temperaments, two different personalities. But you can also take those same two kids and their dad can say the same thing to them. He can say, kids, go up and clean your room. Now, based upon their soul, but also based upon their personal experience with dad. So for example, little Johnny maybe feels like dad is harsh with him because of other experiences. Little Susie feels like she's daddy's little favorite. So when dad says, go clean up your room, Johnny may react one way, Susie may react a different way. So these are three things that can impact our belief systems. So when we talk about our belief system, this is also known as our framework, our worldview, our perspective. Last week, we talked about how the most fundamental worldview is, do you have a theistic worldview where you believe there's some sort of supreme being or God, or do you have an atheistic worldview where you leave out the concept of God? But from that worldview springs everything else. Our view about government. We talked about that last week. Jefferson says all men are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the role of government can take a more theistic perspective or an atheistic perspective, which you see in countries that have more communistic or socialistic governments are always more atheistic. They leave God out of the concept. In fact, I think all communistic and socialistic governments tend to get rid of God. They try to downplay the role of God, because when you lift up God or exalt God, the idea is God gives us freedoms. The role of government is to protect those freedoms. So it's a lot more freedom-based, individual-based than say a communistic or socialistic government, which is all focused more on what's for the common good versus individualism. So anyhow, again, our belief system, our framework, Piaget actually calls it our schema. It's how we see things, and it can be from anything really small, like how do you view McDonald's hamburgers, to, again, how do you view God, to how do you view a certain political party, to, what's your favorite brand of clothes. So all of this is called our framework, our worldview, our perspective, or even our schema. Now, as we go through life, so we're taught beliefs. We believe things out of our own accord, based upon our experiences. As we interact with our environment, we maybe have different of beliefs that evolve. But throughout our whole life, our beliefs are either being challenged or reinforced as we encounter new experiences or new evidences. So again, every experience either reinforces or it challenges your belief, or as you encounter new evidence. So what's an evidence? Evidences are anything that cause us to believe or not believe something. Now remember, evidence is not necessarily proof that something's true, but rather it can reinforce whether we believe something to be true or not. So if I walked into a room and there's a dead man on the floor, one of the first things I'm going to do is what? Look for evidences. Who killed this man? Or was he killed? I mean, I guess if he's bleeding, I'm going to assume he was killed. He might have had a heart attack or something. But if I look around and there's a keychain, or there's somebody left behind a knife or a wallet, I'm going to look at those as evidences that maybe this is the person who did that. Now, those evidences don't necessarily prove anything, but they give me a good reason to believe something or not. And speaking of evidences, I've written down here, I always think about the drama 12 Angry Men by Reginald Rose. And if you're familiar with that, I know it's an old play. I think the movie actually was probably first produced back in the 50s. But you'll remember, if you've ever seen it, there's a young man who's being brought to trial because there's evidences that look like he committed a crime. And so there's 12 jurors in there, and for most of them it just seems like hey, this is just a closed case. I mean, here's this evidence, it looks like it's him, we're going to go ahead and accuse this boy of this, we're going to go ahead and find him guilty. But there's one juror who actually stands up and begins to challenge them and begins to really make them think about, okay, it may look like the evidence is leading this way, but is it really leading this way, or could it possibly be leading another way? Which just shows us evidence can be used to cause us to believe or not believe something, but it doesn't necessarily prove things. Now, there's different types of evidence. So I think about us as humans, and we're all unique. Everybody has a different soul, so we all tend to lean towards certain evidences to help us believe or not believe something. So probably the most basic form of evidence that most of us like, especially in our enlightened age where we use a lot of scientific information and all that, which is good because this is what science is based on, is what's called empirical evidence. Empirical evidence means it can be observed by the five senses. It's observable. It can be experienced. I can hear it. I can see it. I can taste it. I can touch it. I can smell it. It's there, and I can document it. So empirical evidence can be observed, it can be measured, it can be tested, and it should be able to be repeated for the most part. So if I throw a ball up and it comes down, I throw a ball up and it comes down, I throw a ball up and it comes down, I can basically measure that. I can measure how long it takes for it to go up, how long it takes for it to come down. I can maybe measure how quickly or with what force I throw it up. Will that affect how quickly it comes down? But whatever I do, I should be able to pass to the next person, and he should also be able to throw the ball up and have it fall down, throw the ball up, have it fall down. That would be empirical evidence. It's observable, I can measure it, and it should be something that I can repeat. In fact, good scientific process, if you have a good process, whatever the report you give to me, I should be able to follow your process and replicate what you've done and come up with some sort of similar results if I follow the pattern that you've given me. That means it's empirical, it's observable. Some people follow evidence that's based upon logic. Logic just means that it fits into a structure or order. There's a pattern. So if I go up to household A and I want to sell them a vacuum cleaner, I knock on the door and say, hey, I got this great vacuum cleaner I want to sell you, and the guy slams the door shut in my face. And I go to household B, hey, I'm here to sell you this nice vacuum cleaner, and the guy slams the door in my face. And I go to household C, the guy slams the door in my face. And I go to D, E, and after about 10 or 12 houses, it's probably going to be somewhat logical for me to say, if I go up to this 14th house and knock on their door and say, hey, I've got a nice vacuum cleaner I want to sell you, it's pretty logical that they're probably going to slam the door in the face because there's a pattern, there's a structure. I go up and I'm getting the same results. Now, the problem may be I have a bad product. The problem may be I didn't dress very well that day and I look really ugly and people don't want to look at me. But for whatever reason, that logically, I'm probably going to keep getting doors slammed in my face. Some people believe things or don't believe things based on emotional evidence. And this is basically, how does something make us feel? So we tend to, if something brings us pleasure or makes us feel good, we tend to repeat that or believe that. Whereas if something is painful or uncomfortable to us, we tend to avoid it. So I know people who like certain people. In fact, I can think about somebody in my life who always said, if the first impression of you was good, then they always liked you. But if the first impression of you was bad, they never liked you. They wouldn't give you a second chance. And that's because that was an emotional decision. You either made them feel good or they didn't feel good. And they already made up their mind, I like you or I don't, based upon an emotional feeling. A fourth form of evidence is faith. And faith is believing in something or someone that we deem credible or reputable. So I had faith when I walked in this room today. There was a chair here. I sat on it. By faith, I looked and the chair, all four legs were intact. It didn't look like it was leaning to the side. So I sat in this chair believing that it would hold me up. Now, maybe I'd never sat in this chair before, but I believed it would hold me up. And thankfully, it did hold me up. It could have collapsed to the ground. But by faith, I sat in this chair. By faith, I make plans for tomorrow. Thankfully, I've been able to live this long in life, and I, by faith, believe I'll be around tomorrow, so I make plans for tomorrow by faith. I put trust in certain people by faith. There are people that, because they've always told me the truth, they've always been forthright, they've always been honest. If I go and ask their opinion, I believe that they will be honest with me. There are other people I don't have faith in. They've lied, they've cheated, they've tried to manipulate. And so if I were to go to, in fact, I wouldn't even go to them and ask their opinion because what? I don't have faith in them. So faith is a form of evidence. Many times by faith, what? You take the step and then the fruition comes. Just like I sat in this chair. I sat in this chair. Thankfully, it held me up. So faith usually involves taking a step and then the fruition or the satisfaction will come afterwards. Another form of evidence that I don't think we use a lot, but we still make decisions, we still believe things based on this, is intuition. And intuition is a inner instinct. It's an inner knowing. It's this gut reaction where maybe we don't have the empirical evidence. We've not seen it before. We can't measure it. Maybe we haven't had enough chance to see if it fits into a pattern, so it's not logical. Emotionally, there's maybe not any feelings. Maybe it does involve some faith. But I remember one time, and some of you, we talk sometimes about women's intuition, but I think everybody has a sense of intuitiveness. Maybe you've experienced it before. I can think of one time, I remember this was several years ago. I was pumping gas and I had just got off work. So at the time I was dressed in some nice clothes, nice khakis and a nice shirt. And I was standing there pumping the gas, and I usually put the gas in, and I was standing there. And for some reason, it wasn't really it's not like I felt bad or good or anything. There was just something that just kind of came in my mind. I thought, I need to step away from that in case when the gas finished pumping, in case some of the gas overflows and spills out from the opening of the gas tank. Now, I've never had that happen before. I've never had gas spill out. But for some reason I was there, I'm like, you need to step away about a foot just in case some of the gas would gush out right toward the end. And it was very interesting. I took about a step back about a foot or so. And again, I've never had this happen to me before, but it happened that night. I heard the gurgling, and I felt I could hear the tank filling up. And we all know that sound as it fills up. There's a certain sound that there's not much space left in there. And as it came up, I was expecting to hear the pump click off like it always does. And right before I heard the pump click off, all of a sudden there was this some gas poured out. I've never had that happen before, and I haven't even had it happen since. But there was something in me, I can't explain it, but there was some sort of intuition that said, step back before some gas might spill on you. So that's a form of intuition. But I believed it. There was this gut instinct. I believed it because I stepped back about a foot, and sure enough, it happened. Now, if it wouldn't have happened, I still followed that gut instinct. Another form of evidence is just tradition, familiarity, and cultural norms. Sometimes we believe things based upon past patterns and societal expectations. I mean, I know people who vote a certain political party, I know people who don't even believe anything the political party stands for, but they still vote that way because dad voted that way and grandpa voted that way and great grandpa voted that way. Or I know people who do things because that's just the way we've always done them. And so for them, that's enough evidence to believe something. It's just the way it's always been done. It's the way I'm comfortable doing it this way, so I don't want to change it. Just there's no need to rock the boat when this seems to work for me and I'm comfortable with it. Even cultural norms. This is what society expects. I'm doing this because society expects me to do this. So those can be types of evidence. Now, regardless of what we believe about something, and how we come about doing it, what evidence brings us to that point. I'm just a big believer that it's our own personal choice. I'm not the kind of person that wants to force my belief on other people. I'm not the kind of person who wants to necessarily shove my beliefs upon other people, because I believe ultimately we all have to make our own choices. We all have to have our own beliefs and then stand with those beliefs. But we just have to always remember that what we believe will determine what we think or do, and then we just have to be able to accept the responsibility for our thoughts and our actions. So next I want to look at in this program, why does belief in the Logos or God really matter? It matters because it could be a life or death situation. St. John, and we talked about this last week, St. John declared, "In the Logos was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." Life, and that life brought light to all. So the decision to lay hold of the Logos, and it could be the difference between living a life of light and darkness, hope and despair, peace and turmoil, purpose and meaninglessness, and fulfillment and emptiness. I always think about, I don't know if you've ever read this story. I used to teach literature classes, and I remember we used to read this short story called The Lady or the Tiger. It was based on an article published back in 1892 by Frank Stockton in the Century magazine. And essentially, if you've ever read the story, it's a story of a king who kind of had this little crazy thing that he liked to do to amuse himself, but he might bring a young man in, set him in an arena, and there'd be two doors. And you can see the two doors here in the picture. And behind one of those doors is this beautiful lady, who just a lovely lady, and he could have her if he opened the right door, and behind the other door is a ferocious tiger that would probably tear you to pieces once you open the door. And so he would set the young man here and he'd say, okay, make your choice. One of those doors has a lady behind it, one of those doors has a tiger behind it. And of course, it is a fictional story, but the whole idea is the thought process and your personal values, everything that went into which one of those doors would you choose, was even worth it to you to take that gamble. And so that's kind of like the way it is when we talk about believing in Logos. Do we want the life that gives light, or do we not want that? Of course, belief in the Logos is not a blind gamble, such as in The Lady the Tiger, because that's what it is. You just roll the dice and say, am I going to pick that door or that door, because I don't know. I'm either going to get one or the other. We talked about this last week. Blaise Pascal, the philosopher, he had what he called his wager or his matrix, which was a logical appeal to belief. Because to him, there were two doors. God either exists, God doesn't exist. And one of those is true. Okay. And I mean, I want you to think about this. If God is true, we all will find out someday after we die. We'll find out if God's true. If God is not true, we will never, ever know it, because we'll just rot in the ground and die. And I've always said that even about evolution. I kind of feel bad for people who are strict evolutionists, because they'll never ever know if it ever exists or not, because there's no way to go in the past and prove evolution. I mean, there's evidences, but there's so many missing links, missing gaps. There's no way to prove it. And there's nothing coming in the future that's ever going to prove it. Whereas if God does exist, we will all know it someday after we die. And so what Blaise Pascal basically said is, God either exists or he don't. He doesn't. And it's that simple. God either exists or he doesn't. He says, if God exists and I believe, then I will enjoy the fruits and the blessings of believing in him and holding to him. If God exists and I ignore God and I reject God, then I'm going to miss out on the peace and the joy and the blessings of God that I could have enjoyed. And according to Scripture, there's not just this life, there's an eternal separation from God that could be the consequence. But then he says the other door is, if God doesn't exist and I believe, I still live a life. I'll die just like everybody else, rot in the ground just like everybody else, go into oblivion like everybody else. But at least I lived a life with some sort of hope and peace. And if God doesn't exist and I don't believe, then I just go through the joy and pain of this life and just endure it and go into oblivion. So for Pascal, he said, logically, it would make sense to choose the door that has the hope. So if we go back to the picture of the two doors, in Frank Stockton's story, one of those has a lady, one has a tiger, and it's a gamble. And you say, I don't know, I'm just going to flip a coin, I'll pick one, I'm either going to be eaten or I'm going to be destroyed. But what Pascal says is, one door says God exists, the other one says God doesn't exist. But he says, if you believe, regardless of which door you open, if God does exist and you believe and you walk through that door, you will have eternal life. And not only that, you will have had life in this life. If God doesn't exist and yet you still believed in God, you'll open the door and go into oblivion and it won't matter. So with Pascal, it's not a gamble. It's, you have a good choice to make. And he said there's a logical choice to make, because with the logical choice, by trusting in God, trusting in the Logos, you are not going to lose either way, whichever door you choose. So to receive the Logos and trust the Logos, or whether we reject it, it's the one door that impacts every ounce of our being. So there's actually one door. We all got to walk through the door of life, and in that door, we're either choosing the Logos or we're not. I mean, it's that simple. There's no in between. You either choose to follow the Logos, choose not to. You may say you believe in the Logos, but if you don't follow him, you're still missing out on the life that gives light. So one's total existence, from the simple to the complex issues, are impacted by our decision to believe or disbelieve the Logos. It's a personal, individualized decision. But the love of the Logos compels believers to create awareness of this choice. For example, it's because I care about the Logos. I love the Logos, but I also care about you that I do this program. You know, it'd be very easy to say, well, I believe in God and I'm happy with that. And if you don't want to believe in God, you just do whatever you want. And it would be very easy to do something like that. But because I care, I feel like I at least need to encourage people to say, look to the Word of God, to the Logos of God, to the one who gives structure and order to all things, so that in this life you may find purpose and meaning. And the choice is yours, but at least because I care, I can at least share that and make you aware of that choice. So as we get into the next programs, we're going to dig further into understanding the Logos, so that the evidence presented, so I'll present evidences. Some of them will be logical. Some of them may be based on faith. Some of them may actually be empirical, that will open your eyes. My hope is that your eyes will be open to believe and fall in love with the life that gives light to all mankind. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to send me an email at thelogos.lightlovelogic@gmail.com. Again, that's thelogos.lightlovelogic@gmail.com. I want to thank you for joining me here for episode 2. I appreciate your time. I know in episode 1, I want to do an introduction. I do want to I appreciate those who've commented to me. I've had some comments come in. I know I had to clean up a few things. I had some spelling errors in the introduction in the first one, and a few other things I wanted to work on, but I do appreciate all the comments that you send me, and I pray that this is a blessing to you and that together we will explore the Logos and grow deeper in love with Him. Have a great time. We'll see you next time.